This is a follow-up play report or discussion anyway from a game I brought to Gothcon with me that I have been sitting around and poking at since 2004 when I picked it up at Gen Con from the publishers who brought it that year in its year of publication. Laughing Pan Productions. The game's called Horrific. It's 6 little decks of playing cards. We've got, it's so horrific terror in the cards, and that's the deck for Mal, the sorceress, the deck for the Lord of Bones, the deck for the Doctor. Might as well keep going. There are 6. I'll hold them up. Here we go. Yes, we've got Dela the Gypsy, the Huati, and Vladimir, who I think you can probably recognize. Well, so you get the idea. A given player seizes a deck and plays it against the others. You can do it one-on-one or all 6, anything in between. So, okay, it's not collectible, it's not customizable, but it is individualized in the way you play. Well then, what do I have to say about this? First, what am I doing? I like competitive play with cards and board games in a very, very narrow range. Probably best described as not too long, pretty brutal, and very dynamic in the later stages of play. Kind of a brief description. Well, anyway, so I like that kind of play, but I really, really have a very limited range of the techniques that I can find fun. But I really like checking out these games as well from a design perspective, thinking in terms of relevance to role-playing. The goals of play in a game of this kind, which is most games. It's what most people think about when you say, let's play a game. The goals are so straightforward and so easily discussed. They're not problematic when people talk about winning the card game or winning the board game. Nobody has a problem with that. It doesn't hurt anyone's feelings even to talk about it or suddenly explode into fractals about, well, what is victory actually? And, stuff like that. I mean, we don't have to worry about that. So it's kind of the goal of play, the purpose of play is kind of purified and known. With that in hand, you can look at the dynamics toward that end and really address them without being continually tripped up as to whether the goal is right or good or, the purest of play or any nonsense like that. All right. So, therefore, you can learn a lot by looking at these, and I happen to like games that are small press published and are ambitious and are taking risks in some ways and trying to be a little different, partly for marketing purposes and partly because the people playing it sort of got the bug and said, let's try it this way. And I just find that a productive headspace and a fun space. Well, what's going on with this game? And I brought it to Gothcon, and there was the big kind of publisher get-together the night before the con, and everybody brought games, and there were a bunch of games hanging out there. It was a bar and a sort of restaurant-y cafe area, and everybody sat around and talked and hung out and drank beer and played games. Well, I sat down with Ulf and Magnus and a few other people that they invited over, and Bob, whom I met for the first time, and we pulled out some decks actually we played a couple of games. One of my favorites, Condottieri, which is pretty much exactly the kind of game I was describing a couple of minutes ago. And then also I pulled out Horrific and explained that this is a game that, may or may not be all that baked or good. It disappeared after publication, and I suspect met the fate that many games meet. The first thing is that the decks are individualized mainly in terms of proportion. So it's not as though each deck has a ton of unique cards. It's that the working cards are in different proportions for each character. And there are 1 or 2 that are not relevant for a given character, so it's not in that deck. So that's one thing. Another thing is that each character has different victory conditions. And so that's kind of cool. Everybody's playing toward a different end, and you kind of have to know what the victory conditions are. They, oh no, they're getting close. I better do something that maybe isn't my victory condition. You have to sort of trade off strategically on that. And then there's the interesting quality of one on one versus six against, you against five others, as well as opposed to just one other. Um, and that's kind of interesting too, because then you have sort of temporary alliances and stuff like that, possibly. Well, we have the dynamics of play that everybody needs to concern themselves with. Every deck has contributed a bunch of townsfolk into a common pool, and then there are ways that you can get those townsfolk into your own minion pool, at which point their influence and power become scores for you. So that's what you need to understand, is that they pull in influence and power. They also have something called loyalty. So, okay, good. So those are the townsfolk in your pool, and you can play cards to get them into your pool. Once there, if it's your shtick, then you can kill them and turn them into your undead pool. You flip them over, and you can, then they have scores. And that's called value. An undead has value. Great. So power, influence, loyalty if they're alive, value if they're not. And everybody's kind of like nipping into that shared townsfolk pool to try and, get them. Another important variable is trust. Every character has a trust score. You need to maintain a positive trust in order to play at all. You also have to have enough trust to maintain the loyalty of many of your minions. And then finally, there are some characters whose victory conditions include something about trust. So and you're bleeding it all the time. I mean, you basically are, losing trust rapidly as you play. So you have to keep playing cards to build it back up and, ruin other people's trust and stuff like that. So I think that's pretty much the basics. Now let's take a look at those victory conditions and say, what is it that different characters need? It's a spectrum. Or, you know what? I've been thinking about that word. Terrible word. It's a gradient. That's what people mean usually when they say spectrum. Okay, so at one end of the gradient is the most undead of the bunch, and that's pretty straightforward, right? You've got, the Lord of Bones, and you've got then you got Mal, and these are the ones that are all about, they don't care what the townspeople think. Power, influence, and loyalty have nothing to do with their victory conditions. They don't even care about trust, except to just stay afloat. They just want to build up these big-ass pools of undead, either a number of them or a specific score of value, and that's what they're about. They also are both really, really powerful play decks because the Lord of Bones can steal undead from other people really easily, and Mal has a speed play function that the more undead that she has, the more rapidly she can get cards into her hand, and the more rapidly that she can play them. So they're really kind of like the speed play, power play, bulk up the undead cards. That's one end. The other end of the gradient is all social, and there we've got Dela the Gypsy, and interestingly, Vladimir. They don't care about undead at all. They don't build up undead pools. They care about getting townsfolk minions and having a ton of trust and power and loyalty and influence and stuff like that in different concerns. One thing that's a little interesting is that Dela needs trust higher than the opponents, not a particular score. So that's kind of interesting. You let your trust drop and you're making it easier for Dela, even if trust isn't part of your victory condition. So far, so good. Now let's talk about the middle ones. The Doctor is middling in that she's pretty much about building up undead, but she has to maintain a minimum trust score. So she's kind of keeping an eye on her minion pool. And then right in the middle is the Hwati, who's really interesting because you've got requirements of trust and influence and value, which is the undead thing. So they've got to have sort of a solid minion pool and a solid undead pool, neither of which has to be as high as the victory conditions for any of the others. Well then, all of this sounds like a pretty good set of principles for play, and I think it is. Now, the tricky thing is that the game physically and rules-wise just shows exactly what happens when you rush to publish. When you've got your publishing plan and you've got your publishing budget and you've got your playtest process and you've got your production process, you've got your table scheduled for Gen Con, you got to get it out, and the game is just brutally at 75%, 80% done. And by done, I don't mean refined into production value. That's fine. I'm talking about done as a play experience. And I want to talk about publishing lessons briefly, which is that the product model of game design is terrible, whether it's for board games, digital games, platform games, console games, whatever. It's just terrible for basically designing a game. Everything about it is almost engineered to destroy the process, the cognitive process of making the most enjoyable game possible with your basic ideas. And I hate it. And the less of it, the better. And the more people who ignore it, the better. You can tell that they got the basic idea of how each one was going to win. They optimized each one for how it was going to win. And then, I'm projecting or speculating here, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, then they discovered that it was nothing but the luck of the cards and who drew the right combo quickest, so then they threw in a ton of denial cards. And there are a ton. You can ruin others' trust, you can steal their undead, you can, screw up their pool. I mean, half the deck is about just basically ruining what everybody else is doing. And this is a little frustrating. Because they kind of, in turning up that dial, they should have kept playing and then turned that dial down to its functional minimum as opposed to its maximum. And that didn't happen, so you're basically all sitting around being denied. And it's really frustrating, which is too bad because the dynamics of what you could do and the victory conditions are, individualized and nifty enough that you're kind of pumped. And the color, I don't know if you saw the decks themselves. The cards themselves are in kind of beta looking, and so they're just blank with text. But I'm sure you saw, the actual, pictures and so on are nifty enough. You pick it up and you're ready to go. You read that, you read the victory conditions, like I'm the doctor. Let's kick ass. So there you are. You have hands. You draw a card. You have a hand of a few cards, and you're able to set up cards in a face-up reserve. As you go along as well. You're allowed very limited card play per turn. And here's the interesting thing about this: a lot of things that, in my mind now, looking at it, having played, I would say, well, that should be automatic, just as a piece of your turn. You have to have the right card for. So you're sitting there waiting for, the card that allows you to move things from your minion pool to your undead pool or something like that. And you're also have all this ton of denial. So you're building up cards in your reserve and you're building up cards in your hand and you're trying to get ready to, pump some people into the right place for your victory conditions. And that there are X number of other people at the table fully capable of just torching everything you just did. It took you turns and turns to do it, and it's gone in an eye blink. And everybody can do that to everybody all the time. So we kind of found that we were inspired, and we learned enough to get going, and then Lucy pulled away the football. Power toward your goals. And denial or destruction of them once achieved. So denial of, no, you can't do that, haha, got my shield up, or, conversely, you did it, well, now I'm going to torch it. So if you simply turn the heat up on both of them, what you'll end up with is, yes, quote, slowed down, not too quick, not over too quickly, but on the other hand, negation of what you're doing, which is playing. So what's the difference between simply power balance, balanced play, nuanced play, adaptive play to conditions, the ability to undercut, the ability to deny, the ability to do, all those things can have a very productive and dynamic interaction that's fun. Condottieri is a really, really good example. I'm really glad we played that first. And then the converse, which is where you have all those things, but the net effect is stifling. Everybody's sitting there going, huh, huh, and not quite able to do anything. So there are some really important features of how we play. And I mean that in the most general sense. We got together, we're not working, we're not building, we're not doing anything like that. We're not there, we're not being paid. We are, in the most basic sense of the word, playing. We're here to play. You want to play? Yeah, let's play. And how are these things done in a way that works? And this was a great experience for examining that. There's one other thing too. There's a power card that is full of options. It's kind of like a whole rule book is in this one card. It says, okay, see rules, and you pull it up and like there's a ton of options. So something's weird about that too. There's something that I think could have been put in as a functional piece of play that somehow all these different things got piled into this one card. So something about that's a little off. So you're trying to get done what you want to do in play, and this card gives you too many options, and then other things you have to wait for cards to do in a very piecemeal way. So that aspect of the design, of actually getting where you want to go, is also a little funky. We have options in play which are, you get this thing, now you have the ability to do it. You don't have the option all the time. You have it sometimes, like in this case, when you have the card in your hand or in your reserve. And then you have things which you can do, either because you now have the conditions to do it and you can just do it opportunistically from now on, or you have it all the time. It's like, okay, step 3 in your turn, do this if you want. And so I think that applies to role-playing really, really well, and that we should start thinking in terms of what there on my sheet is an ongoing thing that anybody can do, an ongoing thing that I can do and others can't, an ongoing thing that I can do, maybe others can or can't, but only when X pertains or obtains. And then you have things that you can't do unless you have the juice, whether it's energy or whether it's a card you drew or whether it's a roll you made or something, but the idea being that it's conditional, and you don't know when you're going to get it or when you can drive toward it maybe, or you can wait for it or whatever, but when it pops up then you can do the thing. So all of these little differences are important, because I think you could take exactly the same options and redistribute them differently across that structure, and you would end up with extremely different play experiences, none of which are dysfunctional. Quite a bit of them would be extremely functional. The question is which one suits what you're trying to do. And also, again, as this game demonstrates, not to kind of make those disproportionate in some way, so that too many things are piled into being conditional, or too many things are wide open and you don't know what to do. Thank you very much. I don't know if I'm going to play this ever again, but I'm certainly going to keep poking at it. I'm going to keep poking and going, now how is so much is relevant for role-playing with the different niches and the different, all sorts of cool things. So thoughts, questions, ideas from anyone about anything to do with this stuff? Other games in this category, that you've poked at, and especially kind of at the beta level of production, just let me know.